Cold plunge, brown fat increases body temperature, cold plunges make you lose fat. Look, sure, there's definitely some evidence there. Cold plunges could very well help you burn fat by increasing brown adipose tissue or the beiging of white fat more so. It's more so about if you already have some brown fat, then cold plunging can activate it, right? So if you are a healthy person that has good, healthy mitochondria, you're already fairly active, you do cardio, you resistance training, you have some muscle mass, yeah, there's some decent evidence, at least in rodent models, that cold water immersion is going to activate that brown fat, right? So it's going to make it so that the brown fat that you do have kicks up to increase your body temperature. So sure, you're going to get some fat loss effects, more than likely. But I want to share why I actually cold plunge. It's a little bit different. I think that most of the levers that I pull for fat loss are done in the gym and in the kitchen, but indirectly, there's bigger levers that you pull that trickle down and cascade into those things. For one, the evidence of recovery is just too darn strong to ignore. Almost all the professional athlete studies that you look at show that ice baths and cold plunging works. Like, it helps them recover, at least as far as perceived recovery. Like, it helps perceive soreness. So it's doing something. But at the very least, it's helping them downregulate after the fact enough that their body is allowed to recover better. So yes, you do increase certain stress responses. And yes, you do decrease the inflammation that is required to be there right after a workout. But is it to any measurable degree, especially for someone that's already fit? I cold plunge after a workout quite regularly, and it doesn't seem to impede any muscle growth for me. But I more so like to use it before a workout. It wakes me up in a way, and it actually makes my joints feel really good. A lot of times people realize like their joints are stiff, but for me, a lot of times when my joints are stiff, it's almost like they're stiff but like loose at the same time, like in a dangerous way, where the muscles are tight but the joint is kind of loose, and I feel like I'm gonna jar something all cattywampus there. So for me, I like to cold plunge a little bit before I work out. And if you look at guys that like are big proponents of cold plunging, most of them are that way. They start their day like that. But for them, it's a little bit more ritualistic. I like to look more scientific. The second reason that I'm a big fan of it is for the oxytocin and serotonin boost. Look, I work out for a reason, and it's not just to look a certain way. I am addicted to working out. I like the rush that I get, and I know a lot of people are the same way. And I find that when you get that activation and that binding of the 5-HT receptor that you can get when you get a flood of these neurotransmitters, these neurochemicals when you jump in a cold plunge, that could help me go from being like a crab apple that day to being in quite a good mood that makes someone that makes good decisions. What's interesting is that the state shift that happens with a cold plunge is hard to document unless you're looking at like an fMRI scan of someone literally before, during, and after cold plunge, which if you've seen that literature, show me, because I haven't seen it. But I would imagine there's some major changes that could be seen with like functional MRI with that. Point is that state shifts change, mood changes, and it's one of the reasons that I do it. One of the things that I like to do is actually practice breath holds and doing breath work in the cold tub because it's like an accelerator of it. Breath work is phenomenal anyway for building CO2 tolerance, for helping my performance, for emotional regulation, all these things. But doing it in an accelerated cold environment, it's basically amplifying it, basically putting a weight vest on your breath work, so to speak. You'd wear a weight vest to increase your pull-up strength, wouldn't you? Well, do some breath work inside of a cold tub and see what happens there. Now, the cold tub that I use, I want to take a minute and thank Home Saunas for giving me the current cold plunge that I have. And I want to give a brief review of it anyway, because it's probably the best cold plunge that's out there on the market, at least in my opinion. It's a stainless steel tub, so you're not getting any kind of like weird corrosion and stuff like that that you might get with other ones. It doesn't degrade, but it's also foam insulated. So if you check it out, it's completely insulated with foam on the inside. So once it gets cold, it doesn't take that much energy to keep it cold, which is really, really neat. And this is one of the most top of the line chillers that you would ever encounter in a cold plunge. Not to mention it's all enclosed, so you don't have like a separate chiller. But this chiller gets it down to 28 degrees. So I can have a thick layer of ice over this sucker if I want to have it super cold. A lot of other competitors in the cold plunge world, they will only get down to like 38, 39 degrees, which is cold. Don't get me wrong, you can get a lot done with that. But if you want to get really cold and be able to just do short stints, because what I do when I jump in a cold plunge is I go in for like a minute or 2 minutes at a really cold temperature, maybe 3 minutes at a really cold temperature. For me, like 40 degrees is like bath water. So I can go and sit in 40 degrees for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but then I run the risk of getting sick. Because I'm in there too long. Like, I don't know if we should be in there that long. I'd rather go and get the shock factor, the spike in that like sympathetic nervous system that I need to therefore downregulate when I get out. A lot of the benefits you get from a cold plunge is when you get out of the cold plunge, the downregulation that occurs. You feel that whoosh. Like, you get in, it's cold, it's kind of miserable, you get out and you're like, whew. That is the feeling of downregulation working. And it's amazing when you learn how to master it. But this cold plunge is also rated the best cold plunge by Forbes magazine and Business Insider in 2024. So it's the one that's used by people that want a high quality cold plunge, that want like top of the line stuff. Okay, it also has an ozone and UV sterilization attribute. So you can turn this on and it will sterilize. So if you have someone else that wants to get in it and they're like, ooh, like, I don't know if I want to hop in that. Someone else is in there with their half naked, sweaty body. Well, you can sterilize it so you're at least killing off the pathogenic material, right? So that way, still going through its normal filtration system and keeping the water itself clean, but you run this UV cycle for like 15 minutes and it auto shuts off and it does it, and it's great. The interesting thing is, even though it's a relatively energy conserving model, it gets these things cold so fast. It gets the water to temperature really, really quick compared to some of the other cold plunges I've used. It's also on these caster wheels, which makes it super easy. I have mine indoors, which I was reluctant to do for a long time, but then I realized I can just wheel this thing around. It has a drain where I can just drain it real quick. Honestly, it's just a simple cold plunge that gets really cold, that is highly rated and highly durable. So that's the one that I personally use. I will go ahead and I'll link out to them down below if this is a cold plunge that you're interested. Again, I've used the Morozco, I've used the Plunge, I've used the Michael Phelps one, that's the hot cold. I've used them all, and this one just makes the most sense for me because it's practical and it's real. So that link is down below if you want to check them out. The third reason that I use it is something that I already mentioned. It's to master sympathetic downregulation. So the same reason that we exercise, it's the same reason we would cold plunge. We exercise to build resilience. But what we don't often think about is, if you look at like CrossFit athletes, they'll sprint, they'll do their thing, and then they'll flop on the floor and they'll breathe. That's rapid downregulation. Recovery is all about how quickly can you go from here to here. It's not about constant. I used to think it's about stimulus, 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 protein, 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 protein. Now I'm like, no. It's about stimulus, and then the rest of my life, how do I keep it low and slow and controlled? Cold plunging allows me to have that stimulus so that by contrast, the rest of the world just doesn't seem like as big of a deal. I can put my emotions on a shelf because it's just me, the cold water, and the little biatch inside myself. So with that, everything else is just a wave in the ocean. I can step out and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I know where I'm at. Trust me when I say, like, if you view it like that and you stop trying to find scientific benefits all the time, you're gonna get benefit out of it. Because it's not about the science so much as it is about what is it doing to you and your mind. The fourth thing is, for whatever reason, it helps me sleep. If I do use a cold plunge at night, I'll use it like 2 hours before bed. But again, I think it's because it stimulates that sympathetic nervous system so much that then you have a nice come down. And if you make it habitual, it can improve your sleep. This works really, really well if you do some contrast. This is where you get a huge benefit from cold plunging and then doing some glymphatic clearance by going into a sauna. Now, whether you're using an infrared or a dry heat sauna or a sauna blanket or whatever, Sunhome also has some great saunas too. But saunas are nice because then you're actually increasing the glymphatic clearance. So it's allowing your brain to sort of create intracranial pressure. That the pressure therefore creates enough pressure for the cerebral spinal fluid to flush and sort of quote unquote wash the brain because it goes around the outside and then drains out. Something that normally only really happens when we sleep, you can induce a bit more via proper sauna usage. But contrasting with the cold plunge makes it so that you get the sympathetic activation with that too, with your nervous system. So you get a double whammy. Lastly, the reason I'll use a cold plunge is for sheer motivation. The neurochemical change, nothing wakes you up more. And I mean nothing. I mean, it's maybe if someone like jumped in your house and was trying to burglarize and was in your face waving a, whatever, but if you jump in that thing, it's going to be stronger than a cup of coffee. And I'm not saying replace your coffee. I love my coffee, my yerba mate, I love my green tea, I love all that stuff. But for me, hopping in that sucker and getting freezing cold will wake me up so dang fast. and let me be able to take on the day. That's why I do it pre-workout so much. So again, a big thank you to Sun Home Saunas for not only providing me with an awesome cold plunge that I use all the time, but for existing and being something that people can use in a usable way that is not a giant monumental disaster and mess. I'll see you tomorrow.